One of the sacred kernels of wisdom of the manosphere is that single mothers just have it bad, right? But the reality out there is not quite what it is depicted in the manosphere. I think we often have this tendency, not just exclusively in the manosphere, obviously, but online, to get stuck in our echo chambers and bubbles, and we don't really think about how things might actually be, and so things that are repeated often enough become sort of sacred truths. And this is something that happens online. This is not unique to the manosphere by any means. But today I want to spend some time talking about the reality of single motherhood, because although we in the manosphere tend to point it out as being particularly grim, and it is somewhat grim, it's not nearly as grim as people believe it to be. And I want to talk about some of the reasons for that. So let's talk about the cultural, social developments of the last couple of decades. I don't want you to think about a turn of phrase and a word, wedlock, out of wedlock. Now, most of you probably recognize that, but think about the following. Would anyone in contemporary speech ever use that term to describe a woman who's had a child and was not married? Probably not. Almost nobody. Even if they were older. If an older person said something like that, it'd be more along the lines of, well, back in those days, having a child out of wedlock, nobody would say that. Nobody in 2022 would say, yeah, but unfortunately Jill had her child out of wedlock and that really screwed her over. Because of obvious reasons. Number one, the number of children born out of wedlock, well, they're legion, right? And number two, it's perfectly culturally acceptable and socially acceptable to have a child out of wedlock. It used to be a very negative thing indeed. Think about the somewhat older novel, The Scarlet Letter, by Nathaniel Hawthorne, all about having a child out of wedlock. And so there was shame and ignominy attached to it. That sort of thing just doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, I'd argue that out of wedlock is a historical phrase. It belongs to the history books because it's just no application these days whatsoever. Nobody would say it that way. Politicians wouldn't say it that way. Your average teenager probably doesn't even know what the term means. So that highlights really just how massively the culture and the society has changed that we live in. Out of wedlock doesn't really exist. The other key element here, why single motherhood is not this death trap that it's often painted to be by some people, is the fact of desperate men. Again, we in the manosphere tend to become a little self-satisfied with our knowledge and our beliefs, and on top of that, we also think, as I've pointed out many times, that this knowledge and information is freely available, and on top of that, everyone knows about it. Everyone knows about the reality of single mothers. Everyone knows about the reality of hypergamy. Everyone knows about the reality of everything. When, in reality, people who think along the lines of your typical Manospherian constitute maybe some fraction of a percentage of the population. So, when you combine that with the fact that there's no stigma attached to having a child out of wedlock, which again is a historical phrase that I'm just using to reemphasize the point, you end up with a lot of men who actually have no problem with it. And the most important element here is the fact that men are desperate these days. And this is anecdotal, but I've talked to dozens and dozens of men, right, in their early 30s, late 20s, and older, particularly in the United States. And what will they say? They'll say it's almost impossible to go on a date or date a woman who is late 20s and older who doesn't have a child. Yes, they exist, but it's really, really hard. So there are a number of elements coming together here that make this very difficult. One, there's an abundance of single mothers, right? Two, there's no stigma attached to it whatsoever. And I should actually add something to that fact, because not only is there no stigma attached to it, I think we still do this. We lionize single motherhood as if it were the most difficult job in the world. Now, there's no doubt that being a single parent isn't easy in general, whether man or woman, but we pretend that single motherhood is something noble, something amazing. So add it to the mix. And the fact that most people are just normies. Most men are normies. And so they think normatively, and given all that, they're not going to have a problem with it. But the desperation men have is insane. Case in point, not related to single motherhood, but Amaranth, the famous Twitch person, we'll put it that way. Do you know how much she makes per month? She makes an average of about $1,500,000 a month. That's an average. Where does that money come from? Why is some woman who is extremely fake, as in she's making use of a lot of plastic, as it were, why is some woman on Twitch making $1,500,000 a month on average? I think you know the answer to that. Desperate men. A lot of them are younger, some of them aren't. But the point I'm trying to make here is that men are desperate. If they're not clued into the various pills, or they haven't been pillified, they are willing to do things that most men in the manosphere would consider shocking or repugnant. So the image of a man who's savvy and wise and encounters a single mother and realizes what a raw deal it is an image that's confined to a very, very small space, online primarily. For most men out there, that's not going to be viewed as an obstacle, at least not a priori, because they're not going to think in terms of, this woman already has a child, and she's going to be spending most of her time devoting it to the child, and won't be able to have my own progeny, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, most men don't think along those lines, especially if they're just trying to get laid. And here we come to the point about single mothers themselves. Yes, it is harder for a single mother to find a quote-unquote partner. Indeed, women are extremely choosy and picky to begin with, and they have even fewer options. But they still can find something, right? For the reasons I've cited. They might not be satisfied with what they find, because women are basically never satisfied, but they can still find something. So this idea that's often promoted in the manosphere that being a single mother is a death sentence, basically, or even matters of the wall. The wall definitely is real, and it will limit a lot of your options, but here's the thing. Women will still have more options than men, even if they're 40-something, right? They're not going to like those options, but they will still have more options in general. Which is another point you'll encounter in the manosphere frequently, that women age like milk and men age like fine wine. And the whole thing about men aging like fine wine, that's only assuming that they're really successful and have taken care of themselves. Most men have not. Most men are just getting by even in their 40s, right? Most men aren't amazing looking on top of that. So there's a really small percentage of men that, yeah, they're going to do really well with women who are much younger and have lots of options. But in that case, it's a combination of looks and financial success, and most men are not extremely successful financially. That's just a fact. Most human beings are not. Now, it is true that, again, the choices a woman in her 40s has, especially as a single mother, are much more limited, but she still has more choices than a single guy in his 40s who only has a decent salary and isn't the most amazing looking guy in the world. It's a bit of a meme, but even elderly women have more options than elderly men. It just is what it is. This is the world we live in. Now, a lot of this is what you could say socially engineered. And by that, I don't mean some sort of nefarious force behind the scenes pulling the strings of everybody, but rather the fact that socio-cultural forces over the decades have reshaped the landscape. It used to be, back in the day, that a woman who had a child but was quote-unquote single, well, the only acceptable reason for that was that her husband had passed away. That was the only acceptable reason, not even too long ago, that a woman could be perceived as okay still, given the fact that she had a child or children, but was a quote-unquote single mother. Nothing like that these days. So, mostly due to sociocultural forces, in conjunction with just basic biology and evolution, yes, the reality is that single mothers don't have it nearly as bad as a lot of people claim in the manosphere, because of all the desperate men out there, because of the lack of stigma attached to it. And this is something that I think was important to talk about, because it's true that there are a lot of important things that are said in the manospherian context, but not all of it is true, and a lot of it becomes very, echo chambery. And if you go out there, sniff around, look at the data, etc., a lot of it doesn't always map onto reality. This is a case of that. Women in general, as long as they're okay looking, will always have more options, whether they're single mothers or not, older or not, than your average guy. That's just the way it works. And to put a final point on it, because The guy who is, say, 45, 46, and a multimillionaire and takes care of himself and looks good and he has a nice salt and pepper beard or whatever, that's rare. That just doesn't happen very frequently. Most guys are just trying to get by, even at that age, right? So that's the unfortunate reality we live in. It is a world that has become increasingly gynocentric, but the baseline always has been on some level. In Children First, that has persisted until the present and is not going to change anytime soon. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please do all that wondrous YouTube jazz. I appreciate it very much. So hit the bell icon to be informed of my videos, which seemingly doesn't work, of course. Share, like the video, comment. Subscribe if you're not yet a subscriber. And if I am still alive, I'll check you out later. Take care. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.